Saint Hormisdas was a Roman. His papacy was dominated by the Acacian Schism, started in 484 by Acacius of Constantinople's efforts to placate the Monophysites. His efforts to resolve this schism were successful, and on the 28th of March 519, the reunion between Constantinople and Rome was ratified in the Cathedral of Constantinople before a large crowd. Hormisdas was born in Frusen, his name given to him in honor of the exiled Persian noble celebrated in the Roman Rite, and according to Iranica, a blood relative. Prior to becoming a deacon, he would be married and have a son, Silvarius, who in turn would become a pope in 536. St. John I was Senes. He was sent on a diplomatic mission to Constantinople by the Ostrogoth King Theodoric to negotiate better treatment for Arians. Although John was relatively successful, upon his return to Ravenna, Theodoric had him imprisoned for allegedly conspiring with Constantinople. While a deacon in Rome, John is known to have been a partisan of the antipope Laurentius. For in a libellus written to Pope Symmachus in 506, John confessed his error in opposing him, condemned Peter of Altinum and Laurentius, and begged pardon of Symmachus. John was imprisoned at Ravenna, where he died of neglect and ill treatment. His body was transported to Rome and buried in the Basilica of St. Peter. The Liber Pontificalis credits John with making repairs to the cemetery of the martyrs Nereus and Achilles on the Via Ardeatina, that of Felix and Agapetus, and the cemetery of Priscilla. Saint Felix IV was a Samnite. He was the chosen candidate of the Arian Ostrogoth king Theodoric the Great, who had imprisoned Felix's predecessor, John I. Felix came from Samnium, the son of Castorius. He was elected after a gap of nearly 2 months after the death of John I, who had died in prison in Ravenna, having completed a diplomatic mission to Constantinople on behalf of the Ostrogoth king Theodoric the Great. The papal electors acceded to the king's demands and chose Felix as pope. Felix's favor in the eyes of the king allowed him to press for greater benefits for the church. However, Theodoric died later that year, allowing Felix to pursue his own policies in peace. Felix attempted to designate his own successor, Pope Boniface II. The reaction of the Senate was to forbid the discussion of a pope's successor during his lifetime, or to accept such a nomination. The majority of the clergy reacted to Felix's activity by nominating Dioscorus as pope. Only a minority supported Boniface. Boniface II was an Ostrogoth and the first Germanic pope. Boniface's father's name was Sigibald. He was probably born in Rome, and was designated to succeed to the papacy by his predecessor Felix IV, who had been a strong adherent of the Arian Ostrogothic kings. Boniface was later elected, largely due to the influence of King Athalaric. For a time, he served as pope in competition with Dioscorus, who had been elected by most of the priests of Rome. Boniface and Dioscorus were both consecrated in Rome on the 22nd of September 530, but Dioscorus died only 22 days later. Boniface II's most notable act was confirming the decisions of the Council of Orange, teaching that grace is always necessary to obtain salvation. Boniface was buried in St. Peter's on the 17th of October 532. John II was a Roman. As a priest at St. Clement's Basilica, he endowed that church with gifts and commissioned stone carvings for it. Mercurius became the first pope to adopt a new papal name upon his elevation to the office. During his pontificate, John II notably removed Bishop Contumiliosus of Rias from his office, convened a council on the readmission of Arian clergy, and approved an edict of Emperor Justinian, promulgating doctrine opposed by his predecessor, Pope Hormisdas. Mercurius was born in Rome, son of Praeectus. He became a priest at St. Clement's Basilica on the Caelian Hill, and even before becoming pope, he had commissioned work for the basilica and made generous donations. The basilica still retains memorials of Johannes, surnamed Mercurius. He donated Plutai and Transenae. A reference to Presbyter Mercurius is found on a fragment of an ancient ciborium. Several marble slabs that enclose the Schola Cantorum bear upon them, in the style of the 6th century, his monogram. Mercurius was elected pope on the 2nd of January 533, apparently the first pope to adopt a new name upon elevation to the papacy. In 535, 217 bishops assembled in a council at Carthage submitted to John II a decision about whether bishops who had lapsed into Arianism should, on repentance, keep their rank or be admitted only to lay communion. The answer to their question was given by Agapetus I, as John II died on the 8th of May, 535. He was buried in St. Peter's Basilica. St. Agapetus I was a Roman. His father, Gordianus, was a priest in Rome, and he may have been related to two previous popes, Felix III and Gregory I. In 536, Agapetus traveled to Constantinople at the behest of King Theodahad of the Ostrogoths, and unsuccessfully tried to persuade Emperor Justinian I to call off a Byzantine invasion of the Ostrogoth kingdom. While in Constantinople, Agapetus also deposed the patriarch Antimus I and personally consecrated his successor, who is Menas of Constantinople. 4 of Agapetus's letters from this period have survived, 2 addressed to Justinian, 1 to the bishops of Africa, and 1 to the bishop of Carthage. Agapetus was canonized in both the Catholic and Orthodox traditions. Saint Silvarius was a Roman and the son of Pope Hormisdas. His rapid rise to prominence from a deacon to the papacy coincided with the efforts of Ostrogothic King Theodahad, the nephew to Theodoric the Great, who intended to install a pro-Gothic candidate just before the Gothic War. Later deposed by Byzantine General Belisarius, he was tried and sent to exile on the desolated island of Palmarola, where he starved to death in 537. Silvarius was later recognized as a saint by popular acclamation and is now the patron saint of the island of Ponza, Italy. The first mention of his name in a list of saints dates to the 11th century, while Pope Silvarius perished without fanfare and largely unlamented during the 6th century. The people from the neighboring island of Ponza have honored the virtuous Saint Silverio, a heritage that reaches from the island to the United States. According to Ponza Island's legend, fishermen were in a small boat in a storm off Palmarola, and they called on St. Silvarius for help. An apparition of St. Silvarius called them to Palmarola, where they survived. This miracle made him venerated as a saint. Vigilius was a Roman. He is considered the first pope of the Byzantine papacy. Born into Roman aristocracy, Vigilius served as a deacon and papal apocrisiarius in Constantinople. He allied with Empress Theodora, who sought his help to establish monophysitism, and was made pope after the deposition of Silvarius. After he refused to sign Emperor Justinian I's edict condemning the 3 chapters, Vigilius was arrested in 545 and taken to Constantinople. He died in Sicily while returning to Rome. Vigilius belonged to an aristocratic family from Rome. His father, John, is identified as a consul in the Liber Pontificalis, having received that title from the emperor in Constantinople. According to Procopius, his brother Reparatus was one of the senators taken hostage by Witigius, but managed to escape before the Ostrogothic king ordered their slaughter in 537. While on the journey, he died at Syracuse. His body was brought to Rome and buried in the San Martino ai Monti over the catacomb of Priscilla on the Via Salaria. Pelagius I was a Roman. A former apocrisiarius to Constantinople, Pelagius I was elected pope as the candidate of Emperor Justinian I, a designation not well received in the Western Church. Before his papacy, he opposed Justinian's efforts to condemn the 3 chapters in order to reconcile theological factions within the Church, but later adopted Justinian's position. Pelagius was born into a noble family from Rome. His father, John, seems to have been vicar of one of the 2 civil districts into which Italy was then divided. Pelagius accompanied Pope Agapetus I to Constantinople and was appointed apocrisiarius. As such, Pelagius acquired great influence with Emperor Justinian I. He returned to Rome in 543. In 545, when Pope Vigilius went to Constantinople on Justinian's orders, Pelagius stayed in Rome as the Pope's representative. Totila, king of the Goths, had begun to blockade the city. Pelagius poured out his own fortune for the benefit of the famine-stricken people and tried to induce the king to grant a truce. Though he failed, He afterwards induced Totila to spare the lives of the people when he captured Rome in December 546. Totila sent Pelagius to Constantinople in order to arrange a peace with Justinian I, but the emperor sent him back to say that his general Belisarius was in command in Italy. Pelagius I served 5 years, and upon his death on the 4th of March, 561, was buried in Old St. Peter's Basilica. John III was a Roman. Catilinus was born in Rome to a distinguished family. His father, Anastasius, was a high-ranking member of the Roman Senate. Catilinus was elected to succeed Pelagius I and was consecrated as Pope on the 17th of July, 561. He took the name John on his accession to the papacy. John's pontificate is characterized by 2 major events over which he had no control. The first was the death of Emperor Justinian I in 565, after which the Eastern Roman Empire turned its attention from Rome and the rest of Italy to pressing problems in the Balkans from the Avars, Persians, and the Arabs. The other major event was the Lombard invasion of Italy, which began in 568. Much of northern Italy was overrun, as well as the central spine of the peninsula, making a shambles of the imperial administration. The Lombards threatened the survival of Rome itself, besieging it repeatedly. Their entrance reintroduced the Arian belief, which threatened the predominance of Catholicism. As the Lombards marched into Italy, Pope John sought out the aid of the hated former governor of Naples, Narses. Though with this act of simply meeting the man, the Pope would have to flee Rome and take up residence at the catacombs along the Via Appia, 2 miles outside the city. There he carried out his duties, including the consecration of bishops. Benedict I was a Roman. He was the son of a man named Boniface and was called Bonosus by the Greeks. The ravages of the Lombards rendered it very difficult to communicate with the emperor at Constantinople, who claimed the privilege of confirming the election of popes. Hence there was a vacancy of nearly 11 months between the death of Pope John III and the arrival of the imperial confirmation of Benedict's election on the 2nd of June, 575. Benedict granted an estate, the Massa Veneris, in the territory of Minturni to Abbot Stephen of St. Mark's, near the walls of Spoleto. Famine followed the devastating Lombards, and from the few words the Liber Pontificalis has about Benedict, we gather that he died in the midst of his efforts to cope with these difficulties. He was buried in the vestibule of the sacristy of the old Basilica of St. Peter. In a ceremony held in December, he ordained 15 priests and 3 deacons and consecrated 21 bishops. Few of the records of transactions outside Rome that could help understand Benedict's pontificate survive, and because of the disruptions caused by the Lombards in Italy, perhaps few ever existed. Pelagius II was a Roman. Pelagius was a native of Rome, but probably of Ostrogothic descent, as his father's name was Winigild. Pelagius became Pope Benedict I's successor on November 26, 579, without imperial confirmation. Pelagius appealed for help from Emperor Maurice against the Lombards, but to no avail, forcing Pelagius to buy a truce and turn to the Franks, who invaded Italy but left after being bribed by the Lombards. Pelagius labored to promote clerical celibacy, and he issued stringent regulations on this matter. During his pontificate, the Bishop of Milan, who had broken communion with Rome in the Schism of the 3 chapters, returned to full communion around 581, while other bishops in northern Italy remained in schism. Pelagius ordered the construction of the Basilica di San Lorenzo fuori le mura, a church shrine over the place where St. Lawrence was martyred. During his reign, the Visigoths of Spain converted, but he also faced conflict with the See of Constantinople over the adoption of the title of Ecumenical Patriarch, which Pelagius believed to undermine the authority of the papacy. Pelagius fell victim to the plague that devastated Rome at the end of 590. His successor, Gregory the First, thought his regulations of clerical celibacy too strict and modified them to some extent. Saint Gregory the First was a Roman, the son of a Roman senator who would become the prefect of Rome at the age of 30. He would go on to live in a monastery he established on his family estate. He is known for instigating the first recorded large-scale mission from Rome, the Gregorian mission. to convert the then largely pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Gregory is also well known for his writings, which were more prolific than those of any of his predecessors as pope. The epithet Saint Gregory the Dialogist has been attached to him in Eastern Christianity because of his dialogues. English translations of Eastern texts sometimes list him as Gregory Dialogos, or the Anglo-Latinate equivalent Dialogus. He would be the first pope to come from a monastery. Throughout the Middle Ages, he would be known as the father of Christian worship, and is considered as one of the Latin fathers and a doctor of the church. He is the patron saint of musicians, singers, students, and teachers. Pope Gregory the Great urged his followers on the value of bathing as a bodily need. The mainstream form of Western plain chant, standardized in the late 9th century, was attributed to Pope Gregory I, and so took the name of Gregorian chant. It is said he was declared a saint immediately after his death by popular acclamation.